Hello! Let's adjust that a little bit. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Readings. It has been a minute. We had a little bit of a surprise news there when we found out that Heaven Official's Blessing and many other books are going to be officially translated into English. Yay! For that reason, the unofficial translations were brought down, and this December we'll be getting the real books. Well, I was not sure about how to handle this, but due to various different things and researching a couple things, we're going to continue reading. I think we are good to go there. Heaven's Official's Blessing is going to continue. I'm going to start doing short readings every day in the morning, most likely. Whoa, that was a little too low. Oh, Lord. How do I... Okay, that's a little better. I'll mess with that later. We're going to do short readings, not every day, but maybe every weekday. We're going to see how long it takes to finish one chapter and see how that goes. We're not going to continue Scum Villain because we're very close to where the unofficial translation ended, so we'd only have one or two we could do anyway. So we will wait until that is officially translated, and then we will continue it. For now, we are jumping back into Heaven Official's Blessing, Chapter 72. Last time, we were dealing with the past. Xie Lian, our prince, is recently ascended to godhood and has been trying to help people. Specifically, the country he grew up in, there's a part of it that is now suffering a drought, and he's trying to fix things. We left off right when he realized that this is probably not going to work long time. It's not going to last as a solution, but he wants to try and help. So chapter 72 is the continuation of that. Chapter 72. To meet you in the mortal realm, to find flowers beneath the rain. After hearing what Mu Qing said, Xie Lian paused briefly in his step, but didn't turn back. He waved his hand and continued forward by himself. When he returned to the Xianlu capital, Xie Lian first headed straight for the royal palace. He didn't know why he needed to go there, since it was not exactly to see his parents. It was only because of the fact that, as a heavenly official, he was forbidden to reveal himself to his closest family members, but more so because in the time he'd left home and in the years that had passed, he really didn't know how to initiate conversation with his parents anymore. That was probably the same for every child in the world. Thus he concealed himself and haphazardly ran about the palace he was so familiar with, but His Majesty the King was nowhere to be seen. Finally, when he came to Qifeng Manor, he found his father and mother. The two had just dismissed the palace servants and were chatting between themselves. The queen sat on the side of the bed. The mask that she was fiddling around with in her hands was the very one that Xie Lian had worn 3 years ago at the heavenly ceremonial procession. The shape of the golden mask was carefully molded with Xie Lian's features, which was why it had fit him perfectly and comfortably when he wore it. When it was seen by others, the degree of replication was almost frightening. The king chided from the side. "Stop playing around with that and come give me a head massage." Even though the king and the queen put up a front in front of the people, ever since Xie Lian was little, he'd seen clearly that behind the scenes, his parents would bicker like any other normal married couple. The queen put down the mask as expected and sat down by the king's side to help massage his temples. As she was combing through his hair, she suddenly said, "You've more white in your hair again." Xie Lian took a closer look. True to his mother's words, the side of his father's hair was graying, and it had aged him a few years. He wondered to himself, didn't father visit the Royal Holy Pavilion to pray just a while back? At the time, his hair was still black. How did it gray so suddenly? The queen handed a copper mirror to the king, but he pushed it away. "No need to see. Just dye it black again next time we go visit Mount Taisong." It was then that Xie Lian realized his hair didn't gray only recently. It's grayed a long time ago. He just dyes it black before coming to see me. Yet because I've been too occupied listening to the prayers of my devotees and running about, I rarely make time to come back and visit, which is why I didn't suspect anything. Coming to the conclusion, Xie Lian was filled with guilt. For once, he was glad his parents weren't able to see him. As the queen massaged the king's head, she murmured, "I told you to rest early every day, yet you never listen to me, and even say that I nag you day and night. Now look at how unseemly you've become. If our son saw you, he definitely wouldn't want anything to do with you." The king huffed. "Ever since your son grew up and his wings toughened, he stopped caring about me anyway." Though he said it in such a manner, he still couldn't help but take a peek at the copper mirror by the bedside and muttered, "It's not that bad. Isn't it still the same face?" Xie Lian was speechless. He never realized his father had this side to him, talking bad about him behind his back with petulant bitterness, and he couldn't help but smile. The queen laughed. Okay, it's not bad. Your health is more important than the heavens. You should rest early today." They're so cute. The king shook his head. "I can't rest right now. Recently, there are a number of people from Yong'an that have arrived at the capital. If they want to come, that's fine, but they've stirred up trouble, making people feel uneasy. It's a tricky situation." This was probably... Oh, no. The pages don't move quite the normal way. There we go. It turns out the reason behind his father's graying hair was because of the drought at Yong'an. There was an unspeakable kind of misery in Xie Lian's heart. The queen nodded. "I heard from Rong-er that he met someone from Yong'an today. He said the man tried to steal money from the temple. How frightening!" The king had a wary look in his eyes. "Indeed, it's shocking. If there were only tens or hundreds of them, that would be fine. But if a couple 100,000 of them come up and go rogue over the capital, who knows what's going to happen?" The queen debated for a while and finally said, "That might not happen. If they follow the laws and keep to themselves, then let them come." The king became agitated. "As the king of the nation, how can I take a risk with something that might not happen? Besides, they definitely can't come. Looking after a few more people isn't as simple as placing a couple more sets of chopsticks down at the table. There are many complications involved that you don't understand." The queen soothed him. "Okay, let's not talk about this anymore. I don't understand the things you spoke of to begin with anyway. If only our son was still here. At least he could take some of the burden off of you." The king scoffed. "Him? What can he do? As long as he doesn't cause me any more worries, then that's already good enough." At the mention of Xie Lian, the king seemed to liven up again. "That son of yours, he's already 10-something years old, but he was raised like a princess. Even if he knew, it won't do any good. He'll add more problems to it. It's best if he stays carefree in the heavens without knowing anything. Let him do what he wants to do. He's not the crown prince anymore. There's no need for him to care about matters in the mortal realm. Let him fly to his heart's content." Xie Lian listened silently as his father ranted with growing excitement. With a knowing smile on her face, the queen nudged the king. "Now you call him a princess. Weren't you the one who spoiled our princess since he was young? And now you want to blame it all on me?" She then sighed. "That child is good at everything except for missing home. Before, when he was studying at the Royal Holy Pavilion, he'd only come back to visit once every few months. Now that he's ascended, it's even more difficult. We haven't seen him once in 3 years. Who knows if we'll see him again?" Hearing her complain, the king took Xie Lian's side. "How would a woman know anything? The Guoshi said those were the laws of heaven. How can we treat him like a common mortal? If you call your son back, you'd be weighing him down." The queen hurriedly explained herself. "I'm only just saying. I won't make any such demands when we're in front of him." Then she muttered to herself, "It's not too bad looking at the statues either. They look pretty much like him, and the statues are everywhere." Watching them for so long, Xie Lian felt an ache in his heart and a hard lump lodged in his throat, making it painful for him to swallow. He couldn't stay hidden any longer, yet he couldn't reveal himself either. It wasn't because he was afraid of breaking heaven's laws, but rather, even now, he still didn't know what to say. As for the situation in Yong'an, he didn't have any solution at the moment. If he were to suddenly appear, it would only cause his parents more agitation and stress. Sad boy. What's a pavilion? That's like a building. It's where he was training to fight and stuff. Hello, folks. Is this the beginning? No, we are on chapter 72. There's quite a bit of story behind this. But it's a fun story. You should definitely check it out. He dashed out of the royal palace. The moment he was outside, Xie Lian took in a couple of deep breaths, and it was only then he was finally able to calm down. He steadied his heart and pulled himself together. Thinking action was better than standing around sighing, he cast a spell and transformed himself into a plainly dressed young cultivator. He ran around the capital, digging for information and recording his findings. Traversing all over, after a full day of work, he got the answers he wanted. Indeed, the water level in all the lakes and rivers within the royal capital of Xianle were lower than the previous years. Back when he was still at the Royal Holy Pavilion, there were a few times he'd snuck down the mountain to play. As he rowed his boat happily along the largest river that crossed the kingdom of Xianle, the water level at the time was only a tad short of the levee, yet now it had dropped several meters. On top of that, the residents of the city said it had been like this for a while. It wasn't something that had happened overnight. Before this, Xie Lian really hadn't paid much attention, but now that he had, he was shocked to see all the warning signs. He'd originally hoped there'd been some mistake in Mu Qing's report and decided to come see for himself. But now he can't deny the fact that Mu Qing had never let him down before. Once the situation was confirmed, Xie Lian stood solemnly by the riverside, deep in contemplation. Pedestrians passed behind from time to time. Some nodded and smiled, others looked on curiously, but most went about happily minding their own business. An unknown amount of time passed, and quietly clouds gathered from the edge of the skies. Sounds of pitter-patter filled the surroundings. It had started to rain. Numerous pedestrians on the street looked up to the sky. So unlucky! It's raining! Let's hurry back. Ugh, how troublesome. Plip-plop, plip-plop. Raindrops were beating down on Xie Lian's face and clothes before he finally became aware of his surroundings. It's raining. When the people in the capital saw rain, they would drop everything to find shelter. Little did they know just how many were dying on the other side of Xianle for a rainstorm like this to come. A group of people with umbrellas ran past, and when they saw Xie Lian alone getting soaked by the rain, they pulled him along and beckoned. "Young cultivator, why aren't you getting out of the rain? It's coming down harder!" Dazed, Xie Lian followed along and ran to seek shelter under a long roof. Not soon after, the group of people tucked away their umbrellas. They broke out in laughter. "Luckily, I saw the clouds gather when I came out today and grabbed an umbrella, or else I really would have become a drowned rat. It's been too long since it last rained. This storm is way overdue. It's going to be a big one. Gosh, see? It really is coming down hard. At this rate, it's going to turn into a deluge." The raindrops were beating down on the ground, splattering outwards. Those people spoke in such a familiar accent that Xianle felt deeply this was his home. This was the place he was born and grew up, and these were the citizens he knew. As the chitter-chatter continued, the rain became a little lighter. A few people urged, "While it's still light, we should hurry and go." Right after that, the men opened their umbrellas and stepped out from under the roof, one after another, but Xie Lian stood where he was. A couple of them glanced back after a brief discussion amongst themselves, and one came over and handed him a worn-down umbrella. He offered politely, "Young cultivator, are you not able to return home? The rain is quite heavy. Why don't you take this umbrella?" Xie Lian snapped out of his daydream. Thank you very much, but what about you?" A few people in the group under the rain called out, "We still have a couple of umbrellas here we can squeeze under. Let's go." Urged by his companions, the man left the umbrella in Xie Lian's hand and ran back. The pa-pa sound of their footsteps slowly faded away in the distance as Xie Lian stood for a while longer, holding onto the umbrella. Suddenly his eyes caught a glimpse of an inconspicuous shrine not too far away. He opened his umbrella and walked towards it in the rain. Upon a closer look, the two sides of the small shrine doors were written with the verses, "Body in abyss, heart in paradise." Turned out this was a shrine of the Crown Prince. Since 8,000 temples were built within only the span of 3 years, it was natural not every one of them would be as extravagant and breathtaking as the one on Mount Taisong. Deluge is a really heavy rainstorm. That's the end of chapter 72. I love this one. It's so sad. Like he's thinking about the drought and then caught up in this rain and just letting himself be soaked, thinking about how this could save lives if only it were elsewhere. So tragic and sad. Oh wait, maybe that's not the end of the chapter. There's just a weird break. Okay, there's a little more and then it's the end of the chapter. Amongst the shrines, there were quite a few that were built by amateurs to fill the number and generate excitement. Not only did they lack a donation box, they didn't have any priests. The only things they had were a clay statue and a couple of offering plates filled with assorted fruits and refreshments. Those with kind hearts would come by once in a while to freshen the place a little, so it could at least pass for a decent shrine. Well hidden in an area like this was such an inconspicuous shrine of the Crown Prince. Without stepping in, Xie Lian could already make out what could be described as a charmingly tacky Crown Prince statue. Exquisite clothing, a pale, round face with a slightly pinkish undertone, and a silly smile. The statue looked like a big doll. If he didn't have so much on his mind, he probably would have laughed. In the past 3 years, Xie Lian had seen 3,000, if not 5,000, Crown Prince statues. There were none that looked exactly like himself. Even the most similar one was points off. As for the rest, they were either too ugly or too beautiful. A majority of the divine statues of most other heavenly officials were too ugly, and yet Xie Lian was the exact opposite. There were some that were beautiful beyond recognition to the point where he himself was embarrassed. He didn't really take a good look at the clay statue to begin with. His eyes had glossed over it quickly. But unexpectedly, a snow-white blur caught his eye and grabbed his attention. Grasped in the left hand of the crudely made clay Crown Prince statue was a flower, white as snow. The pearl-white petals with crystal dew clinging to them looked beyond delicate. One could faintly catch a wisp of its fragrance floating in the air, lovely and endearing. The signature pose of the Crown Prince statue was sword in one hand, flower in the other. Said flower that was held in the left hand would, of course, be a finely crafted flower of gold or gems or jade. However, this was the first time Xie Lian had seen a real flower clasped within his statue's hand, and he couldn't help but lean forward to get a better look. After a close examination, he discovered the Crown Prince statue had probably held a clay flower once upon a time. Whether it fell due to the sculptor's poor skill or if someone had intentionally picked it off, only a small hole remained. The little white flower happened to be placed in the hole. If there was a person that had especially picked a flower to fill the empty space within the statue, that person was truly kind-hearted. Xie Lian's thoughts came to a halt when he heard a series of hurried footsteps. He didn't look back immediately, but instead hid his form. With the umbrella in hand, he lightly leapt onto the altar and then turned around to look down. Within the gray fog of rain, a young boy barged in. When he says he hid his form, he went into, invisible mode again. This boy was no older than 12 or 13. His dirt-stained, patched clothes were soaked from head to toe, and his face was covered by filthy bandages. His right fist was tightly clutching onto his left hand, as if protecting something important. It was only after he entered the shrine did he finally release his hands. A tiny single flower, as white as snow, was sitting in his palms. Chapter 73, To Meet You in the Mortal Realm, to Find Flowers Beneath the Rain, Part 2. Xie Lian made a small sound, as if he'd just remembered something in the back of his mind. The face that was wrapped under the layers of bandages inevitably reminded him of the child he'd met 3 years ago. However, he wasn't completely sure. Pessimistically speaking, could the child still be alive 3 years after escaping Mount Taisong? Just then, the young boy came forward. He lifted himself up on tippy-toes and swapped the flower on the statue with the one in his hands. From atop the altar, Xie Lian could see as clear as day. The petals on the new flower were fuller and even more delicate. It carried twice as many dewdrops, and from the strong fragrance, one could be certain it was freshly picked. Could it be the sole reason for this boy to visit an inconspicuous shrine like this every day was to replace the flower with a fresh one? Moreover, after offering the flower, the young boy stood in front of the clay prince statue. Unlike the others, who stubbornly wanted to kneel, he interlocked his fingers and silently made a prayer while standing. He had followed Xie Lian's wishes. Previous chapter, he mentioned he didn't like people kneeling at his statues, and he told his priest to tell people that, and nobody listened. And if you will remember, the child, in early parts of this story, he saved a child from falling. He tried to help the kid out, and then the priest revealed the kid was cursed, and they wanted to get rid of him, and the kid ran away. This is the same kid. It had been 3 years. Among all of Xie Lian's followers that had prayed, There were officials, nobles, names that traveled across the land, and talents that would impress the heavens. Yet the one Xie Lian felt was the most sincere was this child, who looked barely over 13. Furthermore, it was a child who had probably been kicked out of the fancier golden temples because of his patched clothing, and could only come to this kind of shabby, run-down shrine to offer his prayers. Truly, an indescribable sentiment. Just then, more sounds of wet footsteps came from outside the shrine. A group of children with umbrellas rowdily ran past. At first, Xie Lian thought they were only passing by, but unexpectedly they circled back. Acting like they discovered something extraordinary, one child clapped his hands. Wow! The ugly monster got kicked out again. Even though the group of kids and the boy in the temple were the same age, every one of them was taller than him. When looked as if their parents had fed them well. There was probably a holiday coming up, and all of them were dressed in new clothes and new shoes. As they splashed around in the puddles playfully by the shrine entrance, their innocent smiles were full of life and void of any ill intent. It was as if they didn't really understand that ugly monster were awful words, and didn't think their words could be hurtful. They probably thought it was funny. The boy tightened his fist, but his fist was so small it wasn't threatening at all. The kids by the door teased, "Hey, ugly monster, you sleeping in the shrine again tonight? Better watch out, that mom of yours is gonna beat the living hell out of you when you get home." Xie Lian frowned. Under the wrapped bandages, the boy's one eye flashed with anger. He raised his fists and yelled, "I don't have a home! I don't have a mom! She's not my mom! Get out! Get out! Keep talking and I'm gonna beat the crap out of you!" Yet the group of kids couldn't care less. They stuck out their tongues and challenged, "You dare? Careful, we might just tell your dad again. Let him teach you a lesson." Some raised their brows and sneered. "Oh, right, you don't have a mom. Your mom didn't want you. You don't have a home because your family doesn't want anything to do with you. That's why you can only sleep in this pitiful shrine." The young boy couldn't endure it any longer. With a loud cry, he lunged at them. For such a scrawny kid, he sure could pack a punch. The loud cry almost sent a couple of kids running in fear, but the kid that originally started the fight held his ground. What's there to be scared of? We have more people. It's not scrolling. There it goes. Upon hearing that, the ones who wanted to run away returned and joined the fight, pulling at the boy's hands and feet. Xie Lian finally couldn't stand it anymore. With a wave of his hand, an invisible force shot out of the blue and separated the boys. Immediately after, a powerful wave of puddle water flew up from the ground and knocked the group of children off their feet. In the end, they were still kids. After falling to the ground without knowing why and getting a mouthful of muddy water, their new clothes were completely soaked. Now they'd become even filthier and uglier than the kid they'd made fun of, and the happy laughter from before was replaced with loud wailing. They crawled up from the ground and ran away sniffling with umbrellas in their hands. Ah, hello, Natasha. Yes, I am trying to get back to doing readings more. There's a dog outside. I got distracted. Xie Lian shook his head in disappointment. As a proper martial god, whose job was to ward off evil ghosts and bring protection and peace, this was the first time he'd gotten tangled in this kind of juvenile dispute. Even though he had chased away the wrongdoers, he didn't feel accomplished at all. His gaze returned to the young boy. During the chaos, the bandages on the boy's head had been yanked off halfway. The half-revealed face was swollen with blue and purple bruises. It was obvious these hadn't been caused by the brawl just now. Before Xie Lian could get a better look, the boy had already rewrapped his bandages without a word. He sat down by the clay statue's feet and hugged his knees close. Xie Lian had originally wanted to come to this crown prince shrine to think. He'd planned on summoning Feng Xin and Mu Qing to discuss an important matter, but the child had unexpectedly bumped into had drawn his attention. He set out a summoning, then squatted down beside the boy and stared. Not long after, a rumbling sound came from the boy's stomach. The offering plate still had a couple of fruits and sweets. Although they looked dried and wouldn't taste that good, it was probably better than nothing. Xie Lian picked one up and lightly tossed it toward the boy. Having gotten hit by the fruit, the young boy immediately wrapped his arms around his head and curled up defensively, as if the thing that hit him was a rock, and that it would be followed by more. After a while, he finally looked around and realized it was fruit, and there wasn't anyone nearby. Hesitantly, he picked up the fruit, dusted it off twice, and returned it to the offering plate. Turned out he would rather endure the hunger than eat the offerings off the plate. He's such a good boy. After that, he walked towards the door and looked at the heavy downpour outside the shrine, as if debating whether to venture out to find food. However, the rain was coming down too hard. Since he didn't want to get soaked again, he walked back and curled up on the ground by the clay statue's feet. Just then, Feng Xin and Mu Qing arrived after receiving the call. The two stepped out from behind the shrine. Feng Xin gloomily said, "Your Highness, how did you find such a small shrine? Why did you send out a call from here?" When he looked down, he suddenly noticed a curled-up figure on the ground that he almost stepped on unknowingly and blurted out, "What the hell is this kid doing here?" Mu Qing also looked down, took a good look, and immediately asked, "Your Highness, is this the child that ran from Mount Taisong 3 years ago?" Xie Lian shook his head. "I'm not sure. I didn't know what his name was, nor what he looked like." As the three surrounded the unsuspecting child and chatted, the boy on the ground shifted. As he wiped his face, Xie Lian realized there was blood running down his nose and the corner of his mouth. Seeing this, Xie Lian felt he couldn't do nothing. He said, "Let this child leave first. It's getting dark. The shrine isn't a good place to pass the night." Could it be that he has nowhere to go? If that's the case, then I'm afraid the only place he could spend the night in is here, Feng Xin said. "He has a home, though the situation might not be great," Xie Lian said. "Even so, the shrine isn't any better. If he leaves, we can find him something to eat. He's also injured." Mu Qing spoke up. "Your Highness, please excuse my frankness, but we don't have time to bother with these minor things. Did you call us here because you've come to a decision?" Of all the heavenly officials who resided in the upper court, there had never been one that would accept every prayer from all their devotees. With countless amounts of followers, if one was to care for every single one of them, it would be exhausting. Which was why, sometimes, they would turn a blind eye to minor and less impactful wishes, and pretend they didn't hear, to lessen the workload. Maybe it was due to Xie Lian's young age, with a body bursting with energy and passion, that he had yet to learn how to prioritize properly and work these things out. After some thought, he walked towards the entrance of the tiny shrine while carrying the umbrella that was gifted to him earlier from the pedestrians on the street. Xie Lian slowly opened the umbrella. The falling raindrops bent down on it, creating a pitter-patter sound. On the ground, the young boy heard the sound. "Oh, we're having a situation." "Bobby, it's okay. Bob and the dog are having a standoff. Bobby. Here, come here, Lola. Hey, Bob. It's okay, Lola. Bob, you come here. All right, it's okay, Lola, it's okay. I'm gonna get the Bob. I've taken the Bob. The Bob is taken. You go up on your shelf. There you go. My poor dog. He just wants to be friends with Bob, and Bob won't have anything to do with him. Bob now has a calming collar. They tend to help with anxious cats to calm them down. But so far, it really has not helped him to calm down and be less anxious about the dog. Hopefully with time, it will work. All Lola wanted was to sit next to me, and Bob did not want that. On the ground, the young boy heard the noise and thought someone had entered the shrine. But after thinking no one would really bother with him, he laid back down again. Xie Lian placed the open umbrella by the entrance. The young boy waited for the sound to disappear, but when it didn't, he sat up in suspicion to take a look. When he saw an umbrella leaning against the ground under the rain, like a lonely crimson flower that had bloomed by itself, he froze in surprise. Watching the boy rush forward to grab the umbrella, Mu Qing lectured, "Your Highness, you've done more than enough here. If you're too obvious and he finds out, it would be troublesome." But before Xie Lian could reply, the young boy ran back and shouted from behind them, "Your Highness!" The three gods almost jumped in surprise and turned around. The boy, cradling the umbrella in his arms, had an eye that was reddened and filled with emotion. He lifted his head and shouted to the clay statue, "Your Highness, is that you?" Feng Xin didn't know Xie Lian helped the boy chase away the other group of kids, and had even chucked a fruit at him prior to this. He mused, "The kid is quite clever. He actually figured it out." Mu Qing, on the other hand, suspected something must have happened before, and eyed Xie Lian. The boy begged, "If you're here, please answer one question." From his place, high atop the altar, Xie Lian would hear countless pleas appear before me every day. When a sound becomes repetitive, it numbs the ear and eventually fades into the background. Even so, whenever he heard a voice like this, he couldn't help but drop matters at hand and perk up his ears. From his side, Mu Qing cautioned, "Your Highness, just leave it be." Xie Lian didn't speak. The young boy clutched onto the umbrella tightly with both hands, gritting his teeth. "I'm suffering! Every day I wish I'd die. Every day I want to kill off everyone in this world and then myself. I'm living in agony." From a boy who couldn't be older than 13, shouting words like suffering and kill off everyone sounded almost ridiculous and laughable. However, hidden inside this tiny body was something unexpected, something that nurtured his rage and roars. Feng Xin scoffed. "What's wrong with him? Kill everyone in the world. Is that something a kid could say?" Mu Qing said flatly, "He's still young. When he gets older, he'll know that what he experiences now is really nothing much." After a pause, he looked at Xie Lian. "There are too many suffering in the world. Take Yong'ang's drought, for example. Name one Yong'ang citizen that has it better than him. There's no need to bother with this, Your Highness. Let's focus on our priorities." Xie Lian nodded softly. "Perhaps." To another, the suffering of one probably looked trivial. The boy was still looking at the statue. His eyes were becoming even redder, but there were no tears. With the umbrella in one hand, he reached out with the other and tugged on the clay statue's robes. He persisted. "For what should I live in this world? What does it mean to live?" However, his questions were met by silence. Not a soul to give him answers. It seemed the young boy had expected as much and slowly dropped his head. To his surprise, suddenly, a voice from above broke through the dead silence. "If you don't know how to live on anymore, then live for me." Next to Xie Lian, both Feng Xin and Mu Qing had not expected him to actually answer. And such an answer, too! Their eyes widened. "Your Highness!" The young boy's head shot up, but there was no one there. Only a soft and gentle voice came from the clay statue. "Good job, Bob." "I have no answers to the question you asked. However, if you don't know the meaning of your life, make me the meaning and use me as your reason to live." Feng Xin and Mu Qing's faces looked as if they were about to explode, and both reached out their hands to smother Xie Lian's mouth, sputtering, "No more, Your Highness! You're violating the rules!" But before they could fully cover up his mouth, Xie Lian managed to shout, "Thank you for your flower! It's beautiful. I like it very much." Oh, that part is so good and so painful and so sad. I love it so much. Oh my god, just, if you don't know what to live for me. Oh my god, it's so good. He's such a sweetheart. And clearly there's some interesting connections being made here with this little kid with the one eye and the crimson flower blooming. I wonder who it is. We'll find out more in the future. We're going to quit here. I'm going to try and do short 2-chapter readings every weekday morning. Let me know what time zone or what hours in the morning are good for y'all, and we can see if we can adjust it to reach more folks. Readings tend to be seen more by people afterward than they are live, versus my games, which are seen more by people live. So I'm going to try and do books in the morning, 9, 10-ish. Let me know if there's a time that works better for you. And we'll continue with this stuff. I think tomorrow we'll do the Mulan story, and then we'll switch, and then we'll do that, and then we'll do this. Next month we might do more horror stuff. So thanks again for listening. I gotta work on my start and ending scenes for this channel, but hopefully they'll look better soon. Thanks again. I'll see you tomorrow.